Hey guys, what's up? Public here, back with another video, and today I want to talk about how you get priority target damage inside of Mythic Plus as a Shadow Priest. This is actually inspired by Tettles, who made a video about this a couple weeks ago about kind of why that damage pattern is useful and helpful inside of Mythic Plus, and why you should consider kind of aligning yourself with that kind of thing. So I'm going to talk about what that means for Shadow Priests and how you can best do that with our current kit. Alright, so the first thing to talk about when it comes to priority target damage as a Shadow Priest is to understand what we already have in our kit. The main thing to talk about is Psychic Link. So this is our main form of AoE. It's usually like top 1 or 2 of our like breakdown side of a key. And this is kind of facilitating our rotation inside of Mythic Plus, where we're basically just doing our single target rotation on a one priority target mob that we really want to kill. And that's cleaving the rest of that damage onto all of our other targets with Vampiric Touch active. Now, this is not our only component of AoE damage. We also have things like Idol of N'Zoth, which is down here, that it's usually taken inside of Mythic Plus. We also have Inescapable Torment. So those parts of our AoE kit don't have this feature, but the kind of core Psychic Link gameplay does. And playing around with that can often be a better damage pattern. If you think about kind of your overall group composition, if you're playing with other specs that do kind of mass AoE, and when I say that, we're kind of looking at specs that are dealing AoE damage and effectively splitting that per target. So all of the targets are getting the same amount of damage taken, and they're just zerging the pack down. Now, that is okay for some people, but you need to understand that some packs don't operate that way. And if one pack has like 1 or 2 mobs that have significantly more health than the other ones, everyone doing big flat AoE to everything is probably not what you want, because what's going to happen is all of the targets with lower health pool, they're all going to die, and you're just going to be left with the 1 or 2 mobs that have a higher health pool. You've probably experienced this with, you pull a big pack and all of a sudden you're left with just like one mob, and everyone's just like single targeting it down at that point. That's kind of what we're trying to avoid, because you would call that inefficient cleave. The goal would be to kill everything evenly at once so you can move on to the next pack. Now, the caveat here is sometimes you can chain pulls together, which kind of diminishes the need for this kind of priority target damage. But in certain cases, chaining is not an option, whether the dungeon layout doesn't allow for it. Maybe it's bolstering weak, you don't want to do that. Sanguine, whatever else it is, are preventing you from chaining effectively. So this can be kind of a solution to that. And that's why I think when you're building a comp for a dungeon, it's important to kind of say like, okay, yeah, it's actually fine. This guy's going to do mass AoE. They're probably going to top overall. This person is kind of, maybe they're doing more funnel, maybe priority target damage, whatever it is. And you build your comp up that way to handle all the parts of the key and to try to get the most out of everyone's damaging kit and not stomp on each other's damage. So, as a Shadow Priest, we are one of the specs, along with Outlaw Rogue, Fire Mage, that can do this effectively with Psychic Link. And there's a couple different ways to build around this, like I mentioned. And most of it is kind of indexing into the parts of our kit that make the most sense. Which is why, for most people starting off, I basically just say, yeah, if you're going to play Shadow and Mythic Plus, you kind of just want to play the raid build, which currently today looks something like this, although we usually take Distorted Reality. I'll talk about that in a second. You kind of come down here, you always take Shadowy Insight. Usually we take Mind Devour. We'll just put points in Maddening Touch just to do that. So when we're talking about kind of doing our maximum raid profile, this is usually what we're suggesting inside of Mythic Plus. This is the Dark Ascension N'Zoth Cthulhu build, which is almost exactly what you would run inside of a raiding scenario. You might move Maddening Touch points around, or maybe you have a point inside of Mental Decay. And then pure single target in raid, we usually take Idol of Yasharaj. So usually what this means is you're just moving 1 point around from Idol of N'Zoth to Idol of Yasharaj. That's a pretty good breakdown. You're not really giving up a whole lot to get a good chunk out of AoE here. Obviously you have Shadow Crash as well, which we wouldn't take in pure single target. This build right here, compared to our full single target build, is only like 2 to 4% behind in single target, which is pretty great, and which is why we run this. We can still get the bulk of our AoE damage out of this. Now, importantly, if you're kind of in that environment where, hey, I actually do want to index more into priority target damage, we do have one important choice to make, which is the Distorted Reality Mind's Eye choice node. Now, for the most part in the guide, I kind of default to Distorted Reality, and I do that for a couple reasons. One, from a pure theoretical damage perspective, it's almost always going to be on top. There are some exceptions here, but pure single target mass AoE, Distorted Reality is just better, very slightly kind of in AoE. It's also easier to play with in single target in terms of how often you have to refresh Devouring Plague. And if you play it at lower levels of haste for whatever reason, you're gearing up. Distorted Reality is often just easier to play with in that regard. Whereas Mind's Eye, you are casting Devouring Plague more often. So if you're not as comfortable with your cast windows or fitting things in as well, or you're moving too much, you can't build enough Insanity, it can be a little harder to play with. But the main difference here is inside of AoE. So with Distorted Reality, the general suggestion is you should be kind of tab targeting, moving Devouring Plague, and spreading Devouring Plague in AoE as you get Insanity. It's kind of like a brain off moment where you just say, like, I'm just going to blindly spread this damage. The problem, though, is while that does give you like a 1 to 2% bump in damage on that pack, and it's usually clearly better in terms of overall damage, you are losing out on priority target damage. So keying back off on the point that I made this video on, I wanted to kind of showcase what that gap is and if that choice makes sense to you. Because some of you, as you're pushing keys, you might actually want to make that conscious decision to say, actually, I don't care necessarily about topping the overall meter of the key. I'm actually just interested in timing more keys. And to do that, I want more priority target damage to fit better into that kit. So I'm going to take Mind's Eye. So let's kind of dive into the numbers and see what that actually means. Alright, so I have a couple sim examples here of just really basic stuff. This isn't necessarily something you should take as gospel. I'm only using this to help showcase what's typical for most builds. So what I've done is I put 4 builds into here. The base one is the kind of standard DA N'Zoth Cthulhu build that I was kind of showcasing up here with Shadow Crash. And then the Ghost build is the one where you kind of drop a bunch of this stuff, and instead of taking Cthulhu and all Void Torrent, instead you come down here to take Idol of Yogg-Saron. And typically it's, depending on kind of what you're looking at, it's something like this. You can also do Scream to the Void. It's quite popular as well. Something like this is that Ghost build. The actual like raw talent strings I use are just straight up ripped out of the Icy Veins guide. And then all I've changed here is I've updated. One has ME, which is Mind's Eye. One has DR, which is Distorted Reality. Base in this case is Distorted Reality with the DA N'Zoth Cthulhu build. So I have a couple kind of example sims here to kind of showcase the damage pattern. The first one, which is arguably the most important, this is pure single target for 4 minutes plus or minus variation here. And the reason why I say this is the most important is because still like 30% of the key is still, at least, if not more, on tyrannical weeks, especially higher push keys. The majority of what you're doing is fighting pure single target. And this is the main reason why I suggest that people start with the DA N'Zoth Cthulhu build, because as you can see here, you're gaining significantly more damage going with this build over the kind of traditional like Ghost Apparition build. So, which is kind of contradictory. If you just copy the build everyone's using in like top high-end keys, that might not be the best for your plus 20 key. This is the main reason for that. Usually people that are playing this build are okay with this loss in single target because they're maybe pulling packs onto the boss, or they're just pulling big enough to offset this. But this is a pretty big drop in damage. But importantly, the other thing that I wanted to show specifically with Mind's Eye is without changing any other part of the build, like you could kind of alter flex points here to be a bit more efficient. You can see it's very close in terms of just these two together. So if you're playing the standard N'Zoth Cthulhu build, you want to flip over to Mind's Eye, you can do that and it's all good. You will notice here that Mind's Eye is slightly more favored with Void Eruption, and this is actually directly dependent on what you pick down here. Screams of the Void just does better with Mind's Eye. Mastermind is not as better. So with that build defaulting to Screams of the Void, that's why you see a bigger jump here, whereas this guy is using Mastermind. So you get something similar here. Just kind of depends, again, what you're looking to do. Single target, mass AoE. So before I go into the other numbers, I wanted to show this because I think this is very, very important to understand of like how much damage you're actually losing to going on this Ghost build. And this is why I don't usually suggest it as a starting point, especially in tyrannical weeks. I think, losing 6% damage or 10% damage is quite a lot. For tyrannical, not something I'd suggest. But fortified, maybe that makes more sense. Trash is maybe more dangerous for your group. Now, if we move this over to, this is just a standard kind of smacked AoE. So this is 90 seconds fighting 5 targets. You can see right off the bat, the Distorted Reality builds here are doing better than the Mind's Eye variants. You can see if we look at the DA N'Zoth Cthulhu build, it's about 4% better than Mind's Eye in kind of this AoE environment. So that's kind of where you're talking about like Distorted Reality. You're gaining damage by kind of tabbing Devouring Plagues over. Same thing with the Ghost build. You can see the Ghost build's actually gaining about 10% AoE damage going to Distorted Reality and moving Devouring Plagues around there, which is that's not nothing. But if we pop open this full report here, and you can see this on your own personal sims as well, SimC in AoE environments always gives you the raw damage per second, and then it also gives you a priority target boss damage slice. So what this is showing you is, on just a single target, how are things looking for the builds that you're talking about. And you can see here, there is quite a big difference here in terms of how much priority target damage these builds are doing. You can see the Mind's Eye variant is doing considerable more kind of priority target damage, which, you know, makes sense. With Mind's Eye, you're funneling Devouring Plagues on just a single target with that. So, you know, that being significantly more makes a whole lot more sense. So if we just take that standard setup, you know, you're doing anywhere between like 70k, 40% more priority target damage during AoE, but the overall damage is much closer together in that regard. Same thing with the Ghost build. The gap is not quite as much. It's almost 20% between Distorted Reality and Mind's Eye. And part of that just is naturally Void Eruption is just doing more priority target damage. You have Void Bolt, which is a much stronger ability that is really valuable in AoE still, but it's mostly just doing raw single target damage. Whereas Dark Ascension version has a bit more AoE happening that's outside of that priority target. So this is, now to be clear, this is one boss or a 5 target scenario for 90 seconds. So pretty like average pull size, nothing crazy, pretty average I think for most people, especially if you're just kind of doing one pack at a time. This is what you can expect. Now, if we bump that up to 8 targets, you can see right away on the 8 target version, the Ghost build is starting to really creep up there in terms of how much better it is. And again, this is really kind of best case scenario for a lot of these things. I think an AoE build or an AoE pack living for 90 seconds is pretty atypical, unless you're kind of getting into that upper echelon. The only reason I picked that duration is to kind of show you what that extreme example looks like, so you can see what the swings can look like. Obviously, as things live shorter or longer, you're going to see a swing with the cooldown, primarily because Void Form, you know, really wants packs to live for like 40-45 seconds at least, while Dark Ascension's totally content with a 20-second pack, for example. Now again, same kind of trend here. You're seeing Mind's Eye is about 4% worse than Distorted Reality of the kind of standard D8 N'Zoth Cthulhu build, and on the Void Eruption side, closer to 9%, kind of leaning over to DR. So it's kind of plateaued a little bit there. And same thing here, if we open up the full report, you can see that the Mind's Eye variants are just crushing in terms of priority target damage. 40% better compared to the standard build, and then the Ghost build is, again, similar, like 20%, give or take, just to show you how much damage is on the table. So that's, you know, doing 170k damage to one target versus 235k damage to one target. That's a pretty big deal. In the chunk of things, the overall damage of the pack is worse. You know, you are going from 906k in that case to 873, so you're losing 4% overall, but you're gaining almost 40% priority target damage. That's the trade-off you're looking at. And the last one to showcase, this is a sim that I don't always like to rely on completely, but again, shows you kind of a snapshot in time of like what an overall damage looks like. This is just simply Dungeon Slice. In my kind of complex sims for the charts and other things, I run dungeon route sims where I literally run every single key on Fort Tyrannical at a couple different key levels. This is really simple, but it does include some downtime, which is helpful, and kind of a mix of what you would typically see in a dungeon. And here, same kind of thing. If you're looking at overall, you can see that the Distorted Reality version is about 5% better than the standard build with D8 N'Zoth Cthulhu. And Void Eruption, again, 5.5% better, give or take. If we pop this open, again, priority target boss damage, this kind of base build that I suggest for people is still king. This is why it's kind of my go-to build to recommend to people, at least as a starting point, and then you can kind of alter your build from there. So I think the big takeaway from this video is really to experiment with what you need for that group. If you haven't ever tried Mind's Eye, some of you might find that it's actually easier to play in AoE if you haven't already, but it might be a bit more for you to manage inside a single target, so keep that in mind, especially when your insane generation is a bit lower. But otherwise, the builds play almost identical, and you're just kind of having to pick more, you know, specifically on, yep, this is my focus target, so you kind of need to know what the important mob is in that pack to do effective damage. So that's kind of what I want to talk about in this video. Hopefully this helps in kind of talking through the reasoning with some of this stuff. Let me know what builds that you're having success with and what you like running with your group comp. Again, not everything's going to work for everyone, but let me know what this has done for you, if it's helpful. And big thank you to all the patrons that support me, all the YouTube members. Really appreciate it, guys. And we'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.